Okay, I'm in Hampstead Heath today, and I basically want to talk about the nature of consciousness. And specifically, I want to talk about the difference between um, two different states of consciousness. One state of consciousness is a state of consciousness which makes distinctions between things. And this is what we commonly understand of as the intellect. So the intellect is the thing that will basically like take reality and put it into different boxes. It's like it makes distinctions. It kind of cuts up the world in that way. So you can say like a razor sharp intellect is the thing that's going to like cut up the world. What do I mean by cut up the world? I kind of mean like if you think about it, like in nature there's not really like the concept of light and dark, right? Light and dark are different shades on like an infinite spectrum, but light and dark are categories, and they're rational categories which we just kind of like use to box up the spectrum of experience. So you can like, you say like different colors and stuff like that, different like light and dark, like self and other, you know, like my country, their country, the in fact, the basic point about discriminatory consciousness is that it creates boundaries. Like that's kind of what it does, and that's kind of what the intellect does, and it's helpful and important and very powerful to do that. And actually it's helped drive the human enterprise forward in many ways, but it's just one state of consciousness. It's a state of consciousness, and it's the state of consciousness that's discriminatory. It puts things in boxes, it boxes the world up, and it's like this and this and this and this. So that's one state of consciousness, and it's the intellect, it's rationality, and it kind of gets the infinity of experience and puts it into boxes. So another state of consciousness which I wanted to explore, and I kind of wanted to explore I wanted to make the distinction between them, which is an intellectual function, as I just described, because I wanted to cut it. You know, things come to consciousness by being by relativity. So like light and dark we see in terms of different shades and stuff like that, and so we say like this thing and this thing, and we pull apart the differences between them, and that's discriminatory consciousness. We're using the intellect, we're using consciousness to slice up the world. Anyway, something I wanted to slice up for you today was discriminatory consciousness versus like what would I say? It's like integrative, I don't know if that's the word, integrative consciousness. And that's more like, I'm out here in nature today in Hampstead Heath. It's like amazingly gorgeous. And you know, like Lao Tzu said that nature doesn't worry, and yet everything is accomplished in nature. Like everything's accomplished in nature. Your heart beats, your lungs breathe, you know what to say when you need to say it. Your relationships go on, your body goes on, your life goes on, nature goes on, the world goes on, right? Come out here to Hampstead Heath, it's like the birds are flying. There's just nature all around, is all it's always going on. It's always going on in a harmony, and there's an integration to it, and there's a dissolution of boundaries which goes along with that. So you've got two different states of consciousness here. You've got one state of consciousness where it's actually all about boundaries, and that's the intellect or the rational mind, and actually that's where we can live a lot. We can live a lot in that space. We can live a lot inside that box of like who I am, what my identity is, where I go, what I do, in this very like linear, boxed in, discriminatory consciousness where you know the boundaries, and you can operate within those boundaries. So that's one state of consciousness. Another state of consciousness is this more harmonious, integrative consciousness, which you find in nature. When you go out to nature, you kind of tap into actually something that was your birthright, a state of consciousness that was your birthright, something you were born with, and that our ancestors would have been more intimately connected to. When the trees move, when the water moves, when the birds moves and the dogs move and all of that, you realize that you are all of that, and that there is actually no boundary between that, because that is a holistic thing. It's like life, it's like nature, it's like bam, it's all here, and it's whole. That's the word, it's whole. So two different states of consciousness here. You've got the consciousness that separates and draws boundaries, which is the intellect, and you've got the consciousness which integrates and brings together and aligns and harmonizes. And these principles symbolically have these principles are the masculine and the feminine principle. So the masculine principle is the thing which draws the boundaries and makes the distinctions, and so we can associate a coming to consciousness, as I was saying about the relativity of things, drawing distinctions. That kind of boundary, that separation, is a masculine spirit. That's symbolically masculine, because it's to do with the sun, which is shining right now, and the illumination of consciousness, things coming to more consciousness, coming into greater consciousness. And for things to come into greater consciousness, there must be a separation. There must be a that and this. Oh, I understand now. That is different from this. Oh, I understand that now. That's like a gradient, you see, and that's consciousness, masculine consciousness. Kind of losing my words a bit here. The feminine principle is more associated with the unconscious, and that's when it's at night, when the moon is high and the moon is strong. That's the feminine principle, and that's the unconscious, and that can symbolize as well this more natural space I'm in around me right now, which is like just brings things together more. So the masculine separates and the feminine integrates, and so there are two states of consciousness. Okay, so you've got the masculine, you've got the feminine, you've got the conscious, you've got the unconscious. Yeah, so those are two states of consciousness. And now I'm going to dive in to like the third way of moving between those spaces. So look, I think that a really fascinating way to understand these different states of consciousness is through a third way, and this is the way that medieval or basically ancient alchemists would understand things, and it's the third way is basically a they call it a syzygy. So a syzygy is like a synergy or like a co-creation between two elements of the world. And so if I've just highlighted two different states of consciousness, the more masculine separating and drawing boundaries and drawing distinctions and discriminating between different aspects of things. You know, the intellect, category, boxes, just being like bang. And then the feminine, more harmonious, natural, integrative, bringing things together, harmonizing, aligning, and making whole. And so you've got the feminine aspect, which is unconscious and wholesome, and then the masculine aspect, which is conscious but draws boundaries and draws separations. Now, there's an alchemical motif, which is the motif of the king and the queen. And the king and the queen in what's called a divine marriage, a divine union. And this is an image, and it's a very, very powerful, meaningful and deep image, because it's the marriage of the actualized masculine, the masculine consciousness at its zenith, the king, and then it's the feminine consciousness at its zenith, the queen, and then it's the union of those opposites. So the union of those opposites, it creates a third way. And from my understanding, this is the third way which the alchemists sought. So the alchemists sought something called the Lapis Philosophorum, or the Philosopher's Gold. You might have seen this motif in the first Harry Potter film, where that's all about the Philosopher's Stone, isn't it? And this is what the alchemists sought. The alchemists sought the Philosopher's Stone, and the Philosopher's Stone is basically it's the soul. From a Jungian perspective, it would be the self, and the self or the soul is the union of opposites. It's mandala symbolism. Symbolizes this idea of the integrative structure. Trees are structures of wholeness as well. There's nothing missing from a tree, and so trees are self-symbols also. So the mandala, the tree, the cross, you've got these different symbols of the self, which is the whole. It's the soul. It's the deepest element of who and what you are. And the alchemists sought the stone, so they sought the Philosopher's Stone, the soul, the self, the tree, the cross, the mandala, the elixir of life. This is what they sought. And I believe that it emerges in this third way that I'm talking about here. I believe that you've got masculine consciousness, rationality, the intellect, which is splitting up the world into a million different fragments. That's what science is doing. That's what any conquest, any intellectual pursuit, any form of gnosis and understanding really is a discriminatory project. And then you've got the more integrative, harmonious, bringing together state of consciousness, the feminine, the sun and the moon, Sol and Luna, and it's the union of Sol and Luna, the masculine and the feminine. It's the union, it's the synergy of those principles, the harmony of those principles, which within one's own self, within one's own psyche, within being itself, which is the alchemical gold. That is the elixir of life. That is the union of opposites. That is the Philosopher's Stone. That is the soul. That's why, actually, here's a really nice spot, because basically, you know, paradise. That, you know, in Genesis they talk about paradise, and what's paradise? Paradise is, again, this union of the masculine and the feminine principles. The feminine principles being nature, integrative, flowing, the birds and the water and the wind and all of that, and it's all whole and it's all perfect. And then the masculine is the culture of drawing the boundaries and drawing the units. Let's build this church here, the building of a church. Like the church, cathedrals and churches are great symbols of consciousness, of the ascent of masculine consciousness. And so you've got the ascent of masculine consciousness. you know, in The Lion King, seeing the whole of the kingdom, like, yes, I see the whole of the kingdom, the illumination of masculine consciousness, and then you've got that married with nature, you know, with the flow and the beauty and the integrity of nature itself, which is the feminine principle, Mother Earth. And imagistically, paradise is a union of those opposites. So paradise is another symbol of the self in that sense. So I hope this location helps to illustrate that point. So yeah, wanted to make a video about this alchemical concept, the concept of the Philosopher's Stone, the concept of the elixir of life, the concept of the union of the opposites, the concept of the self, the concept of the soul, and how it's actually a real thing, and it's actually something that can be found here and now in this moment for eternity, because it's a union of opposites. It's the most divine, beautiful principle and reality that there is, and so I think it's a beautiful thing to seek. It's a beautiful thing to understand, and it's a beautiful thing to orient oneself towards. And so yeah, the masculine consciousness, the feminine, the unconscious, the integrative, the harmonious, the natural, the flowing, the earthy, and the masculine, the sky, culture, the ascendancy of the cathedrals, the seeing the whole thing, and bringing those principles into a divine union, a divine synergy. This was the zenith of the alchemical project, and this is where the elixir of life can be found. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you resonate with this vibe, if you enjoy this, click subscribe. I'm going to be putting more stuff out soon as well. Thank you so much for listening.